Hello everybody and welcome to Going Deep with Neon. This is going to be a article, quote unquote, in the form of a video. I got some feedback on the poll that I did a couple weeks back that people wanted more content that was on tight strategical play, so I decided that I would do a deep dive on one of the games from the Invitational last week. So this is in loser's bracket, round 7 of day 2. You can find this on our YouTube page. I'll have a link in the article, so you can watch this yourself. And it's a match between Haidar and Love Up. Now, before I get into things, I just want to say I respect both of these players quite a lot. I've played them on ladder, and I think their performance in the Invitational was quite strong. So, although I'm going to be critiquing their play by going through this very closely and looking at a bunch of these small decisions, this is not meant to be a diss against them, because I think it could be interpreted that way, because I'm going to be critiquing their play. But anybody's play who's looked at this closely, you might have find some minor leaks. So just want to do that. But let's get into the deck lists that are important to our game. So a few things that are relevant. First off, it's Big Combre versus TJP mid-range. For those of you who haven't played the matchup very much, I would say that Big Combre is the control deck in the matchup, and they're looking to get value off of harsh rules and picking apart the threats with their removal spells, and then carrying the game into the late game off of the back of a Seraph or a Mystic Ascendant, and generate a lot of value that way. On the other side, Love Up is on this TJP mid-range that is looking to bash in Big Combre's skull with these giant monsters, and fueled by things like Xenon Obelisk. That is a big component to this. Now, we're only going to be watching the first game here, because there's a lot to say on it. There are a couple of cards that are particularly relevant for this that kind of come up in the course of the game that might be considerations. One of them that's important is False Prince. False Prince, a card that we're all familiar with, very powerful in this archetype, but it obviously has a downside. That is, whenever it's targeted with a spell, it turns into a 1/1. Now, in Big Combre's deck, there's actually very few effects that target False Prince, like spell effects that you can use to target False Prince. You have 2 Protects, which are okay, but they're certainly no like Var's Favor or Torch or something. And then 3 Vanquish, which is actually actively bad against False Prince, because instead of killing False Prince, he turns it into a 1/1, in case you haven't come up with that interaction, you haven't ran into that yourself. And it also means that you're using a Vanquish on a False Prince as opposed to a higher priority target like Circe. With that, also just another quick note, that things that are relevant to the game, the Big Combre list is playing only 1 Wasp and 4 Desert Marshals, so when in doubt, you would expect that the Combre list is playing has a Desert Marshal over a Wasp if there's power up and there's stops. And then on TJP's side, Love Up is playing Awakened Student, that is relevant at some points in the game, and Permafrost, which is a interesting removal spell. So let's get into things. And the game is going to be starting right very shortly. Some of the things that I mentioned were picked up by the casters, but some of them I think are going to be interesting additions, because I'm going to be kind of stopping and starting and going deep into some of the various decisions. Haidar's opening hand is obviously relatively good. We have reasonable mix of power and playables, and we can't see Love Up's hand, of course, until that is comes up. But it's a fairly reasonable hand, a little bit threat light, but it does have a False Prince and a Scouting Party, which is very good in the late game. The only real response to it is either stalled board through multiple cards, or through a Harsh Rule, which is a very important card in the matchup, and both players should know that. So, Haidar developing power. Love Up has the first decision of the game, a False Prince versus Seraph. Should be a fairly easy False Prince, because it's just a bigger, beefier unit that is going to matter a good deal over the course of the game, and hopefully deal some major damage, while Seraph is just a smaller unit. Now, Haidar also has a decision here that makes fairly quickly of playing out the Seraph over the Valkyrie Enforcer. Now, I think this is a closer decision than maybe Hadar considered, given the fact that silencing a False Prince is actually an advantage in this matchup. Usually you don't want to silence False Prince because it doesn't trigger the downside ability of turning into a 1/1, but given that this matchup has so few targeting effects, you'd rather just it not have Overwhelm than have Overwhelm, which is relevant, but was also relevant is that now your Vanquishes would be fully effective against the False Prince. Now, there are other higher value targets for the silence effect, none that are particularly pressing, given the fact that it's either Cyricel on 5 power or Seraph on, which would be on 3 power, but wouldn't only matter as a activated ability at 8 power. So I think that given that Valkyrie Enforcer is at least a consideration, but probably it's better to save the silence effect for later on in the game. So now we get to Love Up String. Now there's a little bit of a juke here that I want to point out and that I think that I am unhappy with. So Love Up goes to attack, takes it back, and is going to go to attack eventually and deal 5 damage. Now, if you're on either side, you should read this as meaning that Love Up has an obelisk. Why? So what units would you want to play before combat? Of all of the spells that are possible, given that your opponent has 0 power open, the only thing that matters is the Seraph on the battlefield. And the answer is just obelisk. It's the only one that comes up. So Love Up should have been able to think through this decision in the previous turn. Nothing changed. Love Up drew power for turn and played it. The Seraph was in the hand last turn, and it's just there now. So anything that would have influenced this decision was known previously. So there should have been like a certainty that Love Up was going to play out either obelisk or Seraph as of last turn. Now, I do think that you want to play out Seraph this turn. The reasoning why is that in obelisk decks, the default, I think, should always be, given the choice, play out more stats every turn, right? You'll play out your Seraph over your obelisk because Seraph is 3/4 worth of stats, and obelisk is only 1/1 worth of stats this turn. So that's sort of a rule of thumb that if you're not aware of that, I think it's correct to always do that. So Seraph is going to come down, but the fact that there's this juke right before combat of get him to attack, take it back, and then eventually attack again should be a very loud signal to Hadar that Love Up has an obelisk in hand, and that might be relevant for some of Hadar's choices moving forward. You're going to know that blocking with exact stats isn't going to be sufficient, given that your opponent can counterplay it by just going over top with obelisks. Now, this is also a decision that is worth consideration. The Great Parliament is a great card that produces a 4/4 owl. Now, so you have the option of either playing out the owl or a 3/3 flyer in the Valkyrie Enforcer or a Desert Marshal. Desert Marshal doesn't really do anything, so it's not a very important option for our purposes. Like you could play it out and try and double lock down the False Prince, but soon they didn't have the obelisk, but we already know that they have that, so it's just a bad play. We can kind of eliminate that. Enforcer, on the other hand, so given the fact that this is a matchup where you are the control deck, you probably want to trade resources for the time being until you are able to set up for a good harsh rule. So that's going to probably involve double blocking, which both the Parliament or the Enforcer do equally well given that your opponent plays an obelisk. So would you rather give up a 3/3 silence or a 4/4 that has the potential to be 2 4/4s later on? The potential to be 2 4/4s later on over a 1 4/4 seems relatively minor right now, given the fact that you're stuck on power. Although the Martial Ironthorn does give you kind of 1 power for free at least, if he's able to give you out the double bonus. So, given that they both participate in double blocks the exact same, how valuable is the silence effect? I'd say this is not one of the matchups that it's the most relevant. You're already able to tag a Seraph here, which is a pretty reasonable target for it, but you also expect that the target's going to be hit by a harsh rule fairly soon because you have that in your hand. So, all things being... and also, you have another silence in your hand anyway. Like, you have a Martial Iron... Desert Martial in your hand anyway. So, one high-priority silence target, like a Cirso, that you're going to need to block down, is already covered. So, given that, I think the Enforcer's better, because it... as I said, you're trading a 3/3 and a 3/4. You're trading your 3/3 for something like your opponent's 5/5. The only other real advantage is that the Great Parliament blocks the Seraph for free, so that can attack. But as I said, the Obelisk already negates that if you're able to play it. If your opponent's able to play it, and if you've caught the fact that they have that in hand. The power efficiency argument, which is also a relevant component of this, I think is less relevant here than it might otherwise be, because the next turn of Valkyrie Enforcer into Desert Marshal isn't exactly exciting, especially given that you have a harsh rule in hand that you're probably going to have to play over the course of this game. So, all these factors together, to me, I think that it's very, very close, but I think that playing the Valkyrie Enforcer is slightly better than the Great Parliament, because you're able to just do the double block, lose the Seraph as opposed to a 4/4 Parliament token, which is probably a little bit better over the course of this game. But this is where we are. Hi there, 4/4, pass a turn. Love Up does the same thing as the last turn, which frustrates me, and kind of reinforces to Hythar that Love Up has a Obelisk in hand if Hythar is paying attention to this. So there's this pause, goes to attack, takes it back, and then goes to attack eventually. This is just very loud signal to Hythar that Love Up has the Obelisk. Now, one thing to consider for this turn, there are roughly 3 possible turns for Love Up to take, which is either play attack with False Prince and play False Prince. There's attack with False. There's a play Obelisk, attack with both, or because attack with both means that if you're playing the Obelisk, then your Seraph can get past the Owl, or it's play out False Prince and pass the turn. I actually like False Prince pass the most. It's a fairly symmetrical board, like not totally symmetrical, but you have 3 units on your side and 2 units on your opponent's side. So a harsh rule is a fairly even exchange. So so you're not worried about being blown out by a harsh rule in that situation. And obelisks are particularly good when you can get like multiple units across. Like in this way pattern of trading means that if Hythar has another unit, they can double block down one of your units again, even if you play an obelisk, and there just ends up being this back and forth of you're actually just trading unit for unit, when you could set up a situation where you're able to attack with multiple units and you get one of them pass and actually deal damage. So for instance, if Love Up this turn had played obelisk and then attack with both, Love Up pushes 4 damage. and trades false prince for the Parliament token, which is just better than keeping this 3/4 sitting around doing nothing. The alternative of playing out false, my favorite though, of course, is playing out false prince and not attacking, so that on your next turn you can play the obelisk and then get a big whack of damage. Where even if your opponent has 3 creatures and units in play, they play it like they develop another one, then they still don't have any great blocks. This is only really negated by something like a Sandstorm Titan that kind of breaks, even not completely, but I think that you get the idea that you're going to be able to. We'll kind of identify this in the next turn when it comes up, of exactly how things would have worked out. So false prince comes down, Hythar does not draw power, ends up playing out the same choice as last turn, and makes the opposite decision, which I find a little bit frustrating, but I think this is the correct decision to do right now. Keeps back in defense. Love Up has the choice of playing out Obelisk or Amber Acolyte. Now, once again, I'm going to say that I strongly prefer the Xenon Obelisk here, because it means that your attacks are even better. You're able to get a lot more damage pass. Amber Acolyte isn't doing a ton on this board. It does help you set up for the scouting party, for next turn, but you don't really want to be sending in a scouting party to this board, because you actually expect for your opponent to have Harsh Rule in hand. Your opponent only has a total of 11 cards in their entire deck that costs 5 or more. There's 4 Martial Iron Thorns, which you don't really care about right now, given the context of your hands. There's Mystic Ascendants, which are not relevant on just 1 extra power, and then you have the Harsh Rules, which of course matters a lot. So you don't really want to be playing into that too badly, and the Obelisk is the best way to develop your board without committing more to the board. It gets you 2/2 worth of stats on board that's actually has effectively charge, as well as developing for the rest of the game, as opposed to the Amber Acolyte, which only gets you 2/1 worth of stats this turn, and the next turn is going to be able to turn into something slightly larger, but it's not really generating very much value. So anyway, that's the choice that Love Up ends up choosing is playing the Amber Acolyte. But one of the things I also find frustrating here is that that Love Up decides to, does the same juke that I am not a fan of, but ends up only attacking with the False Prince. And the reason I'm not a fan of that is that actually you have free damage with your silenced 3/4 Seraph, because what blocks are Hythar going to make? Are you really think that your silenced Seraph is so much more valuable than your False Prince, or that you're clearing your opponent's Seraph off to the board is way more important than their 3 flyer that you can attack with both, and then force the attack on the double block on the Seraph instead, dealing in some damage, or maybe they still double block down the False Prince and you deal 3 damage. But anyway, I find that a little bit confusing as to why Love missed that attack, but I think that just missed 3 damage there. Love Up finally develops the first Obelisk, but also here, I think that this, go back to the previous turn for Hythar, which I am not a fan of, is that Hythar attacks with 3 their Valkyrie Enforcer. Now, there's clearly a plan of blocking the Seraph with the 4/4 Owl, but that is a problem, because you should know at this point that Love Up has an Obelisk if you're paying attention to tells. Now, maybe Heather didn't notice this, but it's something that if you're watching very closely, you can see it really clearly that Love Up probably has an Obelisk in hand. Now, also, playing Amber Acolyte last turn is a little bit strange if you have an Obelisk in hand, so maybe that's the read that Hythar has, but I'm not sure. But one way or another, this leads you to an awkward situation where you can't block down the Seraph with your 4/4 because the Obelisk is going to get it out of the range for this. Given the fact that this is a matchup where the Combrane deck is planning to be the control, I think it's better to focus on not trying to race, but on trying to get value, force your opponent to commit more to the board, and eventually get a 2-for-1 or a 3-for-1 off of a harsh roll, hopefully. So that's where we are right now. So Love Up plays Obelisk, pushes for 4 damage, passes the turn. I think that this was pretty avoidable if Hyder had kept back the 3/3. No blocks, obviously. On Hyder's turn now, we have another decision that is hard. It draws power, has the option to either develop into the board with a Martial Ironthorn, or vanquish the Seraph and attack, or some combination of these things. Like, you can attack or block, or you can develop a Martial Ironthorn, you can vanquish, you can harsh roll, etc. Like, there's just tons of options. Harsh roll, not very exciting on this board, since you have stuff on it already, and you would rather try to get a positive exchange of resources. I'm not a big fan of Vanquish on Seraph because there's just better targets for Vanquish in the deck, and you would rather trade your units for this other mediocre unit compared to something like a Circe, which is just much harder to take down in combat. So, especially under Obelisk, it's very hard to take down Circe in combat. So, I like the idea of staying back to block and not playing out the Vanquish, with the plans of trying to generate value this way and force your opponent to commit to the board, more to the board. I think the only thing that specifically punishes you is a second Obelisk plus power, because that gives your Seraph +3/+3, which is no joke, and it means that she can attack past both your 3/3 and your 4/4, because she becomes a 7/8. So that'd be a problem, but you have no particular reason to believe that they have that. You probably could have guessed the Obelisk if you'd been paying closer attention earlier, but there's no tell that there should be a second Obelisk in hand, given the fact that also Love Up has made every one of the power drops, and there's been no depleted seats that have come in, for instance, which would suggest that there's extra power in hand. There's no power left in hand. But unfortunately for Hyder, the Love Up's hand is great. So, and from this position, what do you do? I think I probably play power pass. And instead, Hylar decides to push for 7 damage and vanquish the Seraph, which I'm not crazy about. Now, one thing that's also important in this is that the vanquish does let when Hylar eventually casts it. Also, this is a pretty egregious misstep in my opinion. Hyder vanquishes post-combat. If Love Up had a stand together in that instance, you're taking a lot of damage on the backswing, and it would have been a pretty big blowout. You would rather clear it out of their hand for the purposes of harsh rule. It might be coming down later on, but it's still pretty bad. Now, this is a fairly obvious play. Now, one thing that is noted in the broadcast, that's my minor point, is that Love Up did miss a damage by not playing out the power for the Obelisk. I don't really know what Hyder is. The Love Up is trying to hide, but that the only other consideration would be the Awakened Student that I pointed out in the pregame deck list analysis, which is barely relevant with the second Obelisk in hand. Like, your Awakened Student that you're playing, even if it doesn't have an Empowered trigger, is going to be just ludicrously huge, and it can, the only difference in reality is like dealing a little bit more damage if it's ever able to connect, and it would trade with a Mystic Ascendant that's received an Empowered trigger, rather than just trading with it. You'd either be able to eat it in combat. So very minor advantage by not playing the power out there. So I'd rather push that one extra damage, because it could matter in the way that erase works out, especially when you have You'll see that maybe later it will matter in the course of how the combat math works out. So now Haidar does obviously have to harsh rule this board away. Maybe also part of the concern here of why Love Up was hiding this was they could have figured out that there was a Desert Marshal in Hydar's hand through attacking with a 3-2 and noticing there's a stop there. That means that there's very, very likely a Desert Marshal. Now, in this board state, assuming that Hydar doesn't have a harsh rule, which once again, I would assume that Hydar does have a harsh rule, given things, is maybe there's this plan of a play out Desert Marshal, silence a Yeti, block a Yeti with the 2-1, and a Yeti with each of the 3-3 and the 4-4, which would lead to an exchange of drawing 0 cards for Love Up and dealing only 5 damage. So that there was that side of things that could of things how things worked out if Hydar doesn't have a harsh rule, which he kind of needs to have right now. But if Desert Marshal is all that they have, then they're in that's the best possible outcome for Hydar. But if you're then able to go Obelisk into extra power, now they're all 5/5s. Once again, they do the same play, but they would deal 11 damage, which would be a bit of a surprise for Hydar, and leave Hydar at 2. So I'm not sure how I feel about that, of trying to just hide the information if that's the reasoning why. I think that's more likely just to be as a result of the Awakened Student plan. But one way or another, like you're really asking Hydar to harsh rule here, since that if they have it, they're going to play it at this point. But that's kind of where we are. So Hydar takes the obvious line, attacks with both of his flyers, plays harsh rule, passes the turn. Doesn't play power for fairly obvious reasons. Draws a Sandstorm Titan. Chooses not to play the Obelisk, which I object to because of power consumption considerations. Maybe it's relevant in some worlds, but not very many. Hydar forced to either harsh rule or maybe set up a series of chump blocks. Plays out power, which is not really relevant, but it is non-zero in possible worlds. But yeah, exchange resource, and does draw the Awakened Student and gets the Empower trigger off of it. It doesn't end up mattering over the course of this game. Things are fairly simple in the way that there's only one more decision I think that really is interesting here. Hydar responds, fairly obvious way, play out Marshal Ironthorn, plays up power, plays the Desert Marshal to silence the 5/5 to stop it from going any further. And then Love Up makes a line of play that is just a little bit sloppy that I object to. So it plays out the Obelisk, and then plays out the power, plays the Obelisk, then plays out the Amber Acolyte. Now, the reason I am not a fan of this is that, A, you don't need to play out the Amber Acolyte before a combat. It doesn't accomplish anything. B, at the very least, if you're going to play out your Amber Acolyte pre-combat, why wouldn't you play out the power after you draw the Amber Acolyte so that you at least suggest that you might have something in hand other than just power? Now it's very clear to Hydar that Love Up only has power in hand. But that's fairly minor. It actually would have ended up mattering, though, over the course of this game, depending on how things worked out, because now this attack is would set you at 6 if you take the damage, and you then have 2 lethal attackers, so that, for instance, you're dead to a top deck Vanquish or Permafrost. So now Hydar has basically says, like, okay, no, I have to double trade. It's a fairly obvious double trade, and you'd probably take it anyway, given the matchup and the way that the board is configured and such. But it does really force Hydar's hand, and you would rather they just don't have the information, and maybe you can sneak in that damage. Double block. Pass the turn. Hide their knees to top deck. Gets Temple's Cry. That's a start. Gets a banner. That's not. Pass the turn. Love up. Draws Sandstorm Titan. Must be nice. Attacks for 6. High there goes to 8. Love up drops Titan because not afraid of a top deck Harsh Rule because clearly Harsh doesn't have it in hand. Hythar draws power. Love up draws straight Gasoline. Now there's his third Xenobelisk can play. That's pretty unbeatable. Game's over, etc., etc. Now, I think that if either player had played a little bit better, maybe things work out a little bit differently in the course of the game. So the way that Love Up's slight misplays worked over the course of the game, I don't end up mattering that much, given the progression of things. Probably would have won anyway, given that how the game played out. And none of them ended up mattering too much. There was some damage that was lost in the early game, but given the fact that damage is dealt in such big chunks in this matchup, it missing 3 damage isn't usually the end of the world, but it is still like a leak nonetheless. Hyther's misplays, I think, were more substantial in that misidentifying your role at various points in the game it actually matters a huge amount in your allocation of resources, and maybe would have bought Hyther a turn or 2 more. Now Hyther would have to top deck like a god to get out of this position because it's just has gone from screw to flood in a very abrupt fashion. It's hard to deal with that, and but it also is something that Combrei obviously has really good cards, so it might have that option. One way or another, there's definitely a lot of alternative worlds in which these misplays would matter a lot more. It's hard to always figure out all of those, but it is something that I think that both players gave up little percentage points here and there that didn't end up, that could have mattered in the course of the game. So that is my take on this game. Hopefully you enjoyed this deep dive of the strategical implications of this particular matchup and the various decisions that are made here. I'll have the link to this below the video so that you can see all the other videos that are done by aReNGee Eternal from this last week's tournament. And I'll catch you all next time.